Hey, David, thank you for coming in today and, speaking to my audience. I mean, you got a really terrific background. I mean, you've done a lot, especially in AI and data science. You've got such a broad a breadth of experience that you're bringing to the world. So thank you for coming in and sharing your
Oh,
insights with our audience.
thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So my audience, when I track it, number one is typically CEOs and founders, co-founders, and then I get engineers and professors and board directors, investors, usually kind of in that order. It appears in all of these tech channels, and then there's one channel that's much more broad. But the one interview appears in multiple venues. And so the audience is always really sort of curious. You were this amazing individual. You've done so much. You're making so many global contributions, and they're always curious about, what are those inflection points in your life that made this wonderful person you are today? And it could be something when you were really young, or maybe when you're in school. It could have been in the family, as career highlights, etc. So, what were they?
Well, again, first and foremost, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you very much. I think far too kind in your words. Well, if I kind of look backwards, and there have been a few, quite frankly, the starting point is really just a phenomenal degree of curiosity to basically understand what's going on around us. I mean, if you think about it and you look at the origin of the field that I'm in terms of AI, today we very much look at it as a technological tech component. Having said that, it was about us, interestingly enough. It's about humans. It's about how do we learn? How is it that a infant who supposedly still does not understand the depth of the context and intrinsity of the world is able to make these astounding distinctions between objects, people, constructs? How does that happen? And it really kind of started from a neuroscience point of view. So actually, that's the very starting point of simply looking around and going, wow, how do we do this? And that interestingly kind of put me on this path that ended up and resulted in the world of AI. And I always like to share, perhaps in slight if my mother ever listens in, it actually all started from detention, where I got sent to detention, and as one usually does in high school, to the library. And I genuinely stumbled on a book called Prologue. And for perhaps, slightly more mature audience will remember Prologue language. For the younger ones, this is a good old programming-based language, so it's logic-oriented. And that combination of curiosity and now this ability to program logic, that was the key one, effectively. That was absolutely the key one. And then further downstream, and I would say very much what drives me today, and I kind of use, however corny it may sound, the tagline of making AI real is it really holds an astounding possibility to better our lives. Yes, there are risks, but fundamentally in terms of bettering our lives. And even if in the slightest, I want to demonstrate the possibilities, the actuality, not just the hypotheticals, but the actuality.
So I'm hearing I'm sort of an innate curiosity, and you're reflecting on all the benefits of data science and AI and so on. But this aspect that when you were in school, you're in detention, and that required you to, you'd be sort of sequestered in a library or something. You had access to books, and you're reading these books on logic, and that got you into, like, you ended up with a PhD in computer science, doing artificial intelligence. So it's quite remarkable. So you end up then in school, really focusing in this area, really catalyzed by the detention. And then what was your first application of work,
Ooh.
when you finished your schooling?
Well, if I may, actually, just before, because my schooling was a while, because after my PhD I did a postdoc, so one can argue that I still stayed a student for as long as I could. But as part, again, of that combination of two things, so today what we look at in terms of, LLMs, Gen AI, in terms of interaction, music, and all that, I actually did that to a certain extent, back in the early 2000s. And again, it was the underlying question of, music is effectively patterns. Could I listen, or in this case would be a machine, listen into the performance and say, oh, this is the person performing? One of the works that I did was to explore and understand, actually, from a psychological neurocognitive point of view. So I was working with psychiatric hospitals, and there the idea is to really understand how we tick. And again, in the end of the day, if you think about EEG, fMRI, all these type of technologies that are leveraged to kind of look inside us, it's all patterns and how you can combine the two. So just wanted to share this very briefly. So music, brains. So I was part of a project called Le Strum, and it was learning the structure of music. And effectively, we had people in these fMRI and EEG machines listening to music. And we were effectively able to learn the relationship between musical patterns and brain patterns, such that you could recreate music simply by thought. Now, you get like, hey, that sounds a bit sci-fi, or potentially could have been sound like a sci-fi. But again, it going back to my point about making even a smallest of difference. Imagine people who may not have, hands or the ability to perform, or whatever situations, or from a calming and soothing perspective. It was really about to create this new possibility of interaction and engagement. So that's back then. And then if I fast forward all the way to after the kind of academic world, the one project that really stands out in my kind of recollection, and I don't know if hopefully it'll be of interest, but it actually had to do with ATM machines. And I'm kind of smiling because I ended up dreaming about ATM machines. And the problem is these things, surprise, surprise, they run out of money because people go and withdraw. And it's a problem. It's a very interesting problem because financial institutions, on the one hand, want to make sure that you as a customer have, a good service. And when you go to these, be it a person or a machine, you get the service that you expect. And you don't have to like, oh, no money, I have to waltz down to another one. But the other hand, it costs them a hefty amount of money to actually do that. So long and short, applying these kind of capabilities of understanding patterns, behavior, predicting, and so forth, we were able to forecast the drawdowns of money across essentially a jurisdiction, and then optimize. And the reason why this really stands in the back of my mind, even though it may sound a bit relatively straightforward, is the impact it had was astronomical. The payback of the entire project happened within 6 months. That's number one. Number two, from a network of just over 1,000 plus machines that used to have a triple-digit cash out every month, went to a single digit. So literally, just from, I think it was about just under 300 cash outs a month to 5. So it was really kind of a win-win from a consumer perspective, from an operator point of view, and of course, from an efficiency perspective. So one, a lot more human-centric, one really more operational, but demonstrative of some of those aspects of what can be achieved.
So before we continue, let's go back then and talk about this idea of looking at brain waves or what's happening in brains. I mean, there's a difference between EEGs and fMRIs, right? Because the fMRIs are really sort of measuring circulation in essence. And then you can see sort of blood flow, and that determines activity in your brain. And you can then map what's happening in the brain to music. And you're saying that you could generate, or you could
Yes.
That's
yes.
really
So okay, you see, getting me excited now. So the reason why we looked at both fMRI, exactly to your point, it essentially captures location. So think of it from a spatial point of view. Where in your brain are things being activated as you're thinking, doing, listening, etc., and so forth. EEG, while at times is less, has the resolution from a location perspective, has high resolution with respect to temporal. So it can read its own. By combining the two, you kind of have the ability of understanding, okay, what's happening on a more kind of temporal point of perspective, and then the other one from a more spatial perspective. So imagine that you have brain generating patterns, and then you are listening to effectively what is a pattern. That's what's music. Now, being able to correlate these two in a slightly more complex manner than the traditional aspect point of view from correlation is you now get a relationship between this pattern, this segment of pattern, and this segment of pattern. And again, from a temporal, point of view. Now, if you do this in a sufficiently robust manner, let's say over a different cohort of individuals or for different types of resolutions of music, you essentially, and that was this was our underlying hypothesis, which kind of was able to be shown. I can then go, Stephen, mentally hum, your favorite song or whatnot. And I could literally have a little speaker, and we actually did this experiment, and it would recreate the music based on your mental and cognitive patterns effectively. Now, granted, it will not be obviously as pristine and accurate, but you know something, it is not white noise. That's kind of the phenomenal aspect of it. And now what's happening recently, and I think there's been a few recent papers and various journals and whatnot, further investigating this space. I will not be surprised when we get to a point when you'll be able to put a headset like this and compose a new piece.
Yeah, and then combine it with some kind of multimodal large foundation model or large language model. And you can do music generation now, you can do art generation. So
exactly.
So you could actually generate that using your brain functioning, and create music and be quite novel using these large foundation models, right? And then I'm thinking you can do cross-mapping interspecies, so you can see correlations between species. And for example, if a dolphin sees a particular object and you see a particular object, there's going to be a particular pattern, and you can correlate these patterns between what we think and what another species thinks, and then you can get interspecies communication, right?
So on that one, and I'm really being tickled here, is I was in a presentation once, and you always get this question of, oh, what do you think would be like a great application of AI or usage or whatnot? And I loved it. I honestly can't remember who it was, but full credit to them. And they just looked and they thought and said, you know what? I'd love to know what my dog thinks. And this is really a mechanism to, again, give us a better understanding. Previously, it was just us, how can we understand ourselves a bit better? Then moving out and using it from a knowledge management perspective, LLMs, multimodal, but this can go beyond, and having a capacity and understanding to really understand the things that go beyond us, whether it is an animal, a dog, a dolphin, or what's stopping us to go even further and think of a tree? Again,
right.
It's really, really providing. When I explain the world of AI, and I always think of my grandmother, who at the time was 95 years old. She was born in 1910. Talk about different era. And I always say, AI is, put aside the terminologies, it's a phenomenal mechanism to understand information. That's all it is. Now, if I oversimplify this whole world of Gen and LLMs, it is a conversational capability to manage knowledge. Now, the moment you think of it in deliberately this abstract way, you go, well, the possibilities are endless. Right. That's exactly it. The possibilities are absolutely endless.
Yeah, and then I guess you can correlate this to, there's sort of a controversial field, or to some people it's controversial, it's quantum biology, right? That a lot of biological effects have some kind of quantum property to it. And I guess the two poster children in this area are photosynthesis. There's something going on that produces more energy than any known way of doing it using, silicon material or whatever, right? And so there's some thinking that maybe there's some kind of quantum effect happening, or birds migrating, and yes. They detect these sort of gravitational sort of or magnetic lines, and it's so sensitive, and how there's maybe some kind of quantum effect happening, and then it actually correlates to quantum spin. People are thinking maybe it correlates to quantum spin, so electron spin. So I think this is, if you could map some of that at that resolution, the possibilities would be sort of quite outstanding, right? And then you can get into plants more, I'm thinking, right? So
there you go. Again, it's each time it's, level up kind of situation and have a better understanding. Now, look, it will always open up. Again, I don't know if the word controversy is the right word, perhaps sensitivities. But this is exactly where it becomes also a matter of a social dialogue. And again, I go back to in times when I work with various individuals who say, oh, we want to go down this path or this initiative to, uncover this, predict that, understand, etc., and so forth. And I was telling them, again, strip aside the methodologies, the techniques. In the end of the day, it's about creating transparency.
right.
Doesn't mean that always everyone's ready for it, for a variety of reasons. So to reinforce your point, so at times something that's been controversial previously is not today. Something that's not controversial today may be controversial tomorrow. So it's really understanding from a societal perspective: are we ready for it? Do we want it? And sometimes it's good not to know.
And then going to your second example, ATM machines and cash withdrawals, and then really seeing patterns there, and then that patterns providing ultimately you can predict, as you said, cash out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a better experience from the consumer standpoint, and it's better management and optimization from the banking standpoint. So it's a win-win, or as a good friend of mine says, it's an omni-win, right? In fact,
I like that.
Yeah, Mark Sadovnik. So that's a citation. Him and the Fifth Element Group, they use this term omni-win. So you got this curiosity, you read, you get this interest in science, you're interested in the human aspect as well, and you can see that in your career, and then you end up with the Management Authority of Singapore at some point, right? So talk about that journey and what happened there.
Oh, entirely coincidental. I had a startup at that point. Well, I was part of a startup at that particular time, where again we were doing work in terms of AI consultancy. And long story short, ended up pitching work, running a few sessions. Who at the time I didn't realize was to basically the entire senior management. And they're like, "Okay, David, we love it. We want to do it." And I thought, like, great, I just got to a consultancy gig for the firm. And like, no, we want you to join. So I thought to myself, look, I don't see it as challenges. I love opportunities, because it's about how do you make it work? How do you make it successful? And having been on the various sides of the world of AI, so previously in consultancy, I was in software, I was in research. You always have this perspective, especially when you use the word regulator, let alone government, that yeah, there you go. You're already grinning there. In terms of it's slow, it's not going to happen. I was like, no, I'm going to join these guys. A, because it's a bit of a national duty. It's to support the industry, and to see, is it really this difficult? Is it really that ordained of a task in order to create an internal adoption of data as part of a supervisory central banking function, because MAS is Monetary Authority of Singapore. It's a combined aspect of financial services, as well as to help the industry. And I did that, and it was an absolutely delight. Both manners of really exploring internally how. So I'm sure you're familiar with the term RegTech, regulatory technology. So basically how to go about using technology for regulatory purposes. And this is back in 2017, we created a new term called SupTech, supervisory technology. And the call to arms was a supervisor needs to leverage the same degree, if not higher, at some aspects of capabilities and technology, from predictions, analysis, modeling, behavior, anomaly, etc., in order to be more precise and specific in their supervisor function, which is ultimately, in the end of the day, assure stability, prevent from the bad actors acting badly. So that's one dimension. And then, if I may, kind of swinging back to the human element of it is, there's been this very ongoing discourse, which is still ongoing to a certain extent, of like, oh, AI is going to eliminate all these jobs. And then on the other hand, you have equally, eminent individuals who are saying it's going to create jobs. And me being a very kind of data-driven person said, look, no, we can't have this. We can't have this emotional conversation. we must have a data-driven conversations. And we conducted what was then the first of the kind study across the entire financial industry, literally across the entire financial industry, and double-clicked to what is going to be the impact on per job. So we mapped pretty much all the jobs, back, front, middle office, what's going to be the impact of automation and AI. And made it very, very transparent. So yes, there were jobs that would be more impact because the tasks in the jobs could be done in a more automated or impacted by AI. Yet then again, there were certain jobs whereby even if they could, you wouldn't want to because of their, think of it of the learning progression. As a paralegal, you have to be the paralegal before you can become, let's say, a professional aspect in your legal field. You can't give it to fully to automated because it's to a machine or an AI because you're disrupting that flow of expertise. But then on the other hand, which would be fascinating, is we realize it's creating new capabilities. It's creating new needs in terms of role. But just to finish off the story, then ultimately resulted to, well, how do we promote? How do we advocate it? How do we incorporate the adoption of AI in the financial industry? And ironically, the answer was, while we didn't put it as regulation, was regulation. It was governance. So when we created this, I'm not sure if people are familiar, but it's called FEAT, Fairness, Ethics, Accountability, and Transparency. So it was the first guiding principles issued by a regulator for the adoption of AI in the industry. And a lot of times people don't realize that while it seems as a industry development, innovation stance, it was actually born out of realization that the industry actually wanted governance, wanted regulation to help them do it properly.
That's really, really fascinating. And Singapore is quite famous, globally, and being really a leader and an innovator, and have the ability, and you're leading in that ability as well. And on the governance of AI or the regulatory side or policy side of AI, and you were a key part of all of that as the first appointed chief data officer, the head of data analytics group, and just going on and on, all of this sort of a marvelous work that you did. And Singapore being really quite famous globally as being an innovator. What made you, and earlier you indicated you had a startup, so maybe let's go back.
Sure.
And you were doing a presentation as a consulting role with startup, and then that ended up with this offer. So how did you get into that startup, and what was sort of your goal with the startup? And then we'll progress past this monetary authority role.
Sure. No. So I'm a big believer that opportunities manifest, but it's always your kind of call of whether you kind of step into them, take them up. So to answer that question, I have to take one step further back, and I was with Ernst & Young, back in the day in Singapore, kind of helping them build up their data practice across Southeast Asia. And then now it's very different. They were very much still an audit firm. So what happened and the kind of what manifested ultimately as a startup is we kind of realized if we really want to do this and we want to do this effectively, it's faster for us to be an external company working in partnership with the audit firm, because there's so many things that you can and can't do, and you have to have so many controls associated. So look, let's just pull out to a certain extent. So it was a couple of us essentially kind of stepped out, but then working back. So the idea behind the startup was actually, as startup size, how are we able to help other institutions, be it partners or obviously direct clients, accelerate their journey with data, both from a more traditional data management aspect of it, and then of course the downstream application AI dimension of it. So actually that was really the rationale. Was the drive was we want to do it, we want to do it faster.
Yeah, so you're always looking at the optimization part, which is part of AI as well,
Yeah.
right? Or quantum computing or whatever, So you're looking at the efficiencies and you're thinking, you know what, I can be more effective if I'm sort of outside and yet partnering than being on the
Exactly.
inside, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and then you can sort of democratize or spread, all of the good wisdom that you have across the whole ecosystem, and not sort of be siloed into one particular part of the ecosystem. So I can see all of the great rationale behind that. So how did you end up where you are today? And
Yeah.
can you describe your role or roles?
Yeah, so I'll start with the roles, and then kind of a bit of the journey associated. So I'm part of the Aboitiz group. Aboitiz is a Philippines-based conglomerate, or the new term that we've been using over the last actually nearly year and a half, a bit more, tech agglomerate, and that's kind of also representative of the aspirations and the evolution and innovation of a conglomerate. So I originally, and I still am, joined their financial arm. So this is Union Bank of the Philippines, where I'm the group chief data and AI officer. So as the name kind of tells, it it is what it says on the tin in terms of managing and taking care of the data assets, and again, exploring, creating, and identifying the opportunities for applications from revenue, customer engagement, operational efficiencies, financial crimes, and so forth. That's evolved within a year or so to a group-wide role, and I established Aboitiz Data Innovation, which initially was a kind of a company within the group to serve the companies of the group, which are outside of financial services, power, generation, and distribution, and then there's a very long tail from feeds, livestock, construction, cement, airports, estates, utilities, and so forth. And the idea there was similarly in terms of your point earlier about optimization, commoditization of capabilities to result in the usage of data, AI, for, well, effectively three things. And I like to simplify it into these three things: revenue opportunities, services; operational efficiency, and, optimizing your bottom line; or risk management. And that kind of resulted in a just exciting, because people always know and hear about the applications in finance, because, it's a mature industry, and it's kind of, there's a lot of immediate and obvious needs, again, like financial crime, catch the bad guys, how do you know that this is a suspicious transaction, or hyper personalization, cross-selling, upselling, and so forth. But then you suddenly have this like AI and cement, and I truly have people kind of sit back and go, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, we've applied AI in cement. And now obviously I'm using it deliberately to be a bit more sensational, but at the end of the day, it's about patterns and it's about the business objective. In that case was, how do I attain the quality controls that I need on cement? Because remember, it's look around you. It's from the buildings, from the roads, the pavements, from everything that's around and needed, but in a way that is the most efficient, meaning it's, operationally efficient and saving me time, and it's delivering a result to my end customers as fast as possible. And this is what really kind of got me excited, is quantifiably achieving ESG goals and reducing emissions. So that's what it was. But behind the curtain was AI.
Yeah, so I can see then the entrepreneurial side. You're working for this consulting firm, but you take outside of, go outside of the consulting firm so you can more easily partner with them. You're not so constrained. And then here, you're really forming the sort of serving the same role across all of the companies and activities within this conglomerate, right? Because you mentioned the bank, but you mentioned cement, utilities, you talked about food
Absolutely.
stocks in some way, or feedstock, and you talked about power. And really, it's about patterns, right? And then if you can optimize the efficiency on the patterns, you can increase revenue, you can reduce risk, you can increase the operational efficiency by the optimization aspects. And I find it really fascinating. You got a PhD in computing science and machine learning from the University of Southampton. You graduated from the Royal Holloway University of London with first class honors in Bachelor of Science, Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence. And that's a really quantitative, mathematically leaning role. And then you end up in cement and foodstuffs or feedstock and real estate and banking and power. And then even earlier, working in this sort of music side, right? The fMRIs and EEGs and sort of amalgamating it and finding these patterns, and then even with the monetary authorities. So it's really interesting that you've got a really big transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary part of what you do. So you must believe then that interdisciplinary is really the root, or what's your opinion of that?
Absolutely, 100%. And just to share, and I kind of sometimes find it difficult even to reconcile this, what may be appear like a bit of a dissonance, because don't get me wrong, I love the math. I mean, I used to thoroughly enjoy the days when I sit down, I used to create, using Rademacher complexity to bound my theories and my models. And now suddenly, I'm having business conversations and have to tone down the math to a certain extent. But it's two elements. One, for us to be truly successful, and I really mean us in a plural and collective sense, for us to be truly successful, we have to realize that things have to work horizontally. Not just from the scientific merit perspective and finding new means of applications. It's also from a very actual point of view. And let me just give you one snippet of an example of, let's say, financial inclusion, a topic that we keep on going on to. And by the way, I prefer to call it financial sustainability, because just including you isn't enough.
Right. The
problem there is not just the usage of AI or the applications, is that fundamentally the reason why ultimately there is a quote unquote excluded demographics or cohort is because they may not have the data that a traditional financial institutions or financial institutions may need to say, yes, we can move on. Now, if you start looking horizontally, I would say, well, Stefan, you may not have a bank account, you may not have a credit rating, you may not have a Visa card or whatnot, but you're buying feeds to feed your animals. I can use that information. You are ingesting power as part of an operation, however sporadic it may be. Suddenly these possibilities, this multimodal approach creates new opportunities in addressing very specific underlying problems. So absolutely. And then secondly, while the domain is critical, and if there's one thing I've kind of learned over the time, is that you have to marry the two. You can't just boast in and saying, I'm a data scientist, the next best thing since butter and toast bread, we can solve all your problems. No. There's a reason why, domain is there, expertise, it's critical, and you have to marry the two. But having said that, data is data, patterns is patterns. Whether you're looking in terms of neurological stimuli, whether you're looking at literally a bakery making bread or a bakery making cement, whether it's a power industry, whether it's a pattern, and the fundamentals are the same. So why not leverage on it, or re-leverage and cross-leverage essentially?
Yeah, and then I'm sort of reflecting, you mentioned financial inclusion, but it's really financial sustainability is the better term. And then that would apply to like healthcare. And rather than
Absolutely.
Healthcare inclusion, really healthcare sustainability is a better term.
Absolutely.
I like that idea, sustainability. So I could borrow that in my...
No, please. Absolutely. And just on the healthcare one, because my dad was a medical doctor, we always used to kind of jest that who's the real doctor, which of course was me. But okay. Is if you think about the lot, and again, not to anyone's fault, it's just the reality of us people, how we operate, etc. Healthcare isn't healthcare; it's sick care. You go for a profession to get treatment when there is already a symptom, when there's already an issue. One of the things that in sustainability is really pushing it backwards to healthcare, right. So that now you have this kind of very significant drop in terms of the actual instances of sick care that are needed, essentially. So fully that it's about sustainability. And whenever we go, in panels or conversations and we talk about, let's say, ESG, I keep on reminding that dimension, that in fact, beyond emissions, which is critical, beyond whether it's scope 1, 2, 3, that it's also about how we think and how we're operating. It's about how do we assure there's a sustainable longevity of something.
And you're working on the sustainability aspect in your region as well, and that is equity, and diversity, equity, sustainability, right? And inclusion, sustainability. And in other words, you have people who have maybe not the same kind of connectivity access or access to the usage of AI, and you're trying to make that readily accessible, right? So skills development, I know that you're
Absolutely.
So can you talk about that journey of skills development, how you're trying to really broaden the umbrella for people who can get engaged in technology and in skills development, and it ties into AI for good. So talk about that big vision, right?
So at the risk of sounding a bit marketing oriented, but I do genuinely believe in this, is I don't refer to AI as artificial intelligence. I really don't. To me, it's augmented intelligence. And the reason I say that is I'm a firm believer that, albeit what may be seen in certain scenarios of automatons and whatnot, is that this whole world is centered on us, humans, beings, and it is for us. Now, that means two things which are absolutely critical, and going back to this dimension of training and engagement. One, of course, is about the proliferation of capabilities and know-how to be part of this new ecosystem, from data management work, which is critical. In fact, if you think about the world of AI, has created a whole booming field of data annotation. Now with LLMs, we also have a booming field of validation. Further from that is obviously the coding, etc., and so forth. So that's a very important one. And I am an staunch believer and advocate of the whole train, proliferate it, share the wealth as much as possible. So as part of that, we have been continuously working, be it a full-blown fledged, with the clients, be it with our teams. In Philippines specifically, we partnered with an organization called Connected Women. And as the name kind of foretells, their purpose is to address this kind of almost a bit of an exodus that happens in the Philippines, where they will usually kind of go around neighboring countries and so forth to work. So how to help mothers, women stay in the Philippines and have access to, decent work, fair, and learnings. So we partnered with them, and in fact, exactly that. So both in terms of providing access to the opportunities from, like I said, from annotations, from coding, from validations, and we train them up so that they eventually can explore a career, even all the way down to being a data scientist. And right now they're about a network of, and I might be wrong because they keep on growing, about 5,000 to 6,000 people, and several projects that we've already deployed, including one we just recently, and my folks in power particularly pleased, because utilities don't usually will kind of digital and AI innovation awards. This was on grid management. It was done in collaboration with this organization, these women. And furthermore, it's how to make sure it's not just the technical skill sets, it's not just the coders, it's you and me, it's everyone. It's a usage. One doesn't suddenly have to become a data scientist. In fact, we don't need everyone to become a data scientist. But we need everyone to understand, well, if I come to you with information, with knowledge, how do you embed it into your existing business process? How do you embed it into your operation? Like what I mentioned about the ATMs. If I come to you and I say, well, here is an ability to predict cash outs across the island, and this is the probabilities, how do you use it? How do you now take it into actually, how do you deploy? That's another skill set that becomes critically important to softly, but also kind of drive. So we do both. And I'm a believer that this would, as the case in point with Connected Women and others, it's not just it's not only not eliminating jobs, it's creating jobs. And this is why I vehemently say it isn't AI that will take away a job. It is another person with the skill sets or appreciation and awareness of AI that may take the job away from someone who doesn't have those. That's why we need to drive and make sure that everyone at least has the opportunity to get on the bus if they so choose so.
And you've been able to create an event, right? Some kind of national event. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. So Philippines is kind of really at this cusp of this digital revolution. I mean, it's a very young population, average age 23. I think if my math is not wrong, it's about 120 million people, just over that. And you're really seeing this need to drive, because it's an archipelago. I think, was it 7,000 islands? So there is a genuine need from a digitalization perspective, inclusion, sustainability, et cetera, and so forth. So we've conducted an event this year in May called AI Summit, where we really wanted to bring a wide range of participants, from your executives all the way to budding enthusiasts, to really open up the box. And it's not just a deep tech mathematical type of event, but it's one that kind of bridges the gaps between those different areas. Again, multimodal. I think it's a recurring theme, and you've resulted in me having a bit of a self-realization here. But more importantly, is because a lot of times when you may go events, it's either super technical or it's super high level, and people will walk away with that feeling of, but how? How do we do it? How do we incorporate? How do we trade? That's exactly what's the objective. So we did that, and it was, I mean, I don't say it myself, but it was really roaring success, whereby organizations came, and we were happy to share those steps, both from Philippines as well as from outside, providing appreciation in terms of those applications in the areas of, financial services, smart cities, or urban environments. And of course, we had a section which kind of touched on the more governance, people, education-centric side of the house. And it was this kind of eye-opening of, wow, this is real, and wow, this can genuinely create that impact that we're pursuing. So we're going to have a second run next year, same time May, even bigger, even better. And again, the objective there is not just to have a bit of fun, because it's always important to have a bit of fun, but it's to creating that opportunity to establish, well, as an organization, what are the next steps? What are the things that I should be doing? What are the things that I should potentially be avoiding? And of course, creating an opportunity and a platform for partnerships. Because horizontally, multimodal, the way for us to truly succeed and accelerate is by finding these opportunities to either learn from one another or work with one another.
I mean, are there plans to kind of share your lessons internationally? I mean, what's sort of the international participation of this regional event?
Yeah. So the first one, it was very much local from that perspective. The coming one is we are looking forward to inviting international participants as well, for two reasons. One is because, again, it's a learning opportunity for those locals, and it's an opportunity for those international to see how they can incorporate and support. And with that, if I may, I actually think it's an opportunity for the international arena to shed their gaze on this part of the world and realize, actually, there's something that we could learn as well. And the reason for that is there are these scenarios, like, for example, what I mentioned about cement. When you're in an area or a place geographically which relatively is advanced, even when there's an opportunity to become further advanced or more improved or incorporation, there's always that resistance because we already are doing some stuff. So what's that delta? Is it really worthwhile? Is it efficient? But when that delta is fairly significant, the resistance to the adoption of technology is actually lower, because it's a win-win, or what was the term you used? Omni-win, effectively. And what you're finding is that the rate of adoption is accelerating. Exactly what happened with China. Exactly what, if you think about, if you go to Kenya and M-Pesa and all this, is it's an immediate, because there's an immediate need, and that to me is a genuine opportunity for countries, individual people, think tanks to come in and say, okay, the stuff that we're maybe still talking about, like even aspects of, let's say, AI and ethics. And I'll give you an example of that. what does it mean on the ground when they're applying it, when they're implementing it? What are some of the challenges they're facing, or what are some of the benefits that we may have not realized, because you don't realize it until you actually execute? And to give you a concrete example is, of course, there's an ongoing discourse with respect to the impact of AI with respect to, and specifically, gender discrimination, and then henceforth the usage of that type of sensitive attributes. So because we want to know, and we're keen to understand the implications, and things are already happening on the ground. We actually did a study, more than a study, actually, an AI application for lending, where we specifically analyzed gender information and its downstream impact in potential discrimination. And what we found was that incorporating gender information not only didn't result in discrimination, it reduced the likelihood of discrimination while concurrently increasing profitability. And that was particularly powerful because there was always, and I've been in many conversations about this around the world, the view of like, oh no, but if we suddenly have to put all these governance and controls and all that, you're going to impact profitability. And we were able to concretely show us, no, you're actually going to be more profitable. Now, again, it was a very specific context in lending. We're very thankful we got recognized by UNESCO AI initiative as one of the AI projects impacting and contributing towards the UN goals. But that's an example. And again, that's from a governance, policy, social aspect, all the way to an application point of view, like how do you apply AI for grid management in a very complex environment archipelago where you're also subjected to different terrains and different elements of, such as typhoon and floods and whatnot. Something that works there, I can guarantee will also work in, the Midwest or, Canada, et cetera, and so forth. So there's a genuine opportunity of a bilateral learning.
And you talked earlier about partnerships. So you're partnering with different machine learning institutes around the world. I think there's one in Canada that you're.
Yes. We're this one I am very proud of. Again, I might be wrong. This may have updated, but last I've checked, we're one of the two only partners in Asia. The other partner with Mila Institute, so Joshua Ventures Research Institute, is Samsung, and we're the only ASEAN partner. And again, the one of the reasons behind that is because of our focus with respect to sustainability and how we can use AI for the objective operational efficiency while attaining sustainability goals. So there's a coming together with respect to agenda and objectives. And again, something that we need, because we need to drive energy efficiency. And the reality is right now, if you switch off the quote unquote dirty energy in the Philippines, it will go dark. So there's almost like a no choice scenario. But by driving operational efficiency, energy efficiency, using such capabilities from AI, we are also reducing those potential harms to the planet while concurrently looking at the alternative green energy. So it's creating a kind of more explicit, in a way, plan from an energy management perspective. So that's kind of where I'm personally hoping that there could be a learning that can also go potentially to Canada and others, exported to other countries' perspective. But yeah, I'm very happy, and we're working with actually Queen's University, also in Canada, and then ETH Zurich. So we have to learn. We have to find these opportunities where we are able to incorporate and work with experts in the field and find these areas whereby we can apply it for demonstrable outcomes. And that's the key thing. And if I may, just to swing all the way back to my academic life, and that's kind of was a bit of the, to me, a coming of age and kind of started my journey outwards, was while I do love the theory, the math, the kind of the possibilities in there, the thing that kind of started gnawing at me was, these papers and, thesis and all this stuff, it's making my mother immensely proud. but I don't want to just see it on the shelf. I don't just want to see it as a piece of paper on my desk. I want to see that piece of paper, don't get me wrong, but I want it to impact someone. I want it to be used in the ground. I want this to be a matter that and everyone is knowledgeable of how they can incorporate it in its application.
You mentioned earlier UNESCO, and I'm wondering if you're referring to the International Research Center on AI, and they actually looked at all of these projects around the world, and it wasn't just startups, it was government, it was big corporations, it was other UN agencies, NGOs, and they selected the top 100 in the world. Are you talking about that project?
I am indeed talking about that project. So very, very flattered of, being these folks out of Philippines and being recognized. And again, to me, beyond that, it's the learning in helping that conversation that is ongoing globally.
Well, that's a pretty big accomplishment, top 100 across governments and industry and academia. It's typically these rankings are just startups. So this is everything, right? So, and that's a remarkable accomplishment. And as you indicated, people should come to your conference because they can learn from working with you and learn from collaborating and partnering with you. Let's now move the conversation because you're so embedded in AI and the application of AI, but across many domains, and it's very interdisciplinary and a very sort of thoughtful kind of sustainability aspect to it. What are your thoughts about generative AI and what's happening with the large language models, and what are your predictions about it?
So thoughts-wise, and I got actually asked this not too long ago, when things got really, there was a lot of attention on the topic. It's kind of twofold. One is I'm super excited. Obviously, it's as a profession, as a person who's made this as my profession, now the amount of asks, requests has kind of jumped quite significantly. From a scientific point of view, it's like, yeah, we've told you. This is yeah, kind of scenario. But it's okay. You put that scientific pride aside to a certain degree. But it's truly exciting. I mean, jokes aside, because the most difficult, in my personal point of view, the most difficult dimension of knowledge management had been the management of knowledge. And let me double click on that. Whether it's an email folders and you have to keep on filing them, whether it is, these knowledge management solutions that are out there, they've all failed in one form or another. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Why? It's because it's like, oh, I need to find a piece of information. Damn it, where did I put it? It's even a library. It's like you need to have the librarians to tell you, oh, sir, or madam, or whomever, it's in this shelf, in this column, you're looking for that book. Generative AI, and again, I'm specifically focusing on the knowledge management aspect of it. So less about, let's say, the music, the art, and all that, which is astronomical as well. But let's just focus on that piece. We've now created a librarian that can sit on top of anything and anything and literally tell you, this is what you're looking for. This is what you're interested in. This is the information. Now, that capability, that competency of having this conversational layer on top of knowledge management, I honestly don't think we have fully appreciated the impact that this is going to have. I think this is one of those singularity moments as a society, because we exponentially grow each time our ability to access information grows. From library, look what happened in terms of internet, in terms of search. It's what I can do, the productivity, the ability to think differently, to explore, experiment. We're only just figuring it out. Now, obviously, this also opened up a whole doorway of challenges. But again, I think to me, this is part of evolution, at a lack of a better word, where scientists always wanted this quote unquote holy grail of AI, which, it's an oracle that can answer anything and everything and all that. And scientists will always kind of pursue that. But what we always realize is, as we get more and more applicationary, is, oh, yeah, maybe not. And what actually now you're finding is that you're essentially saying, well, we want the capability, we want the proneness, we want the application of LLM and generative AIs, but let's limit the domain. And why we want to limit the domain is because, well, we don't want it to, well, as humans, sometimes, jack of all trade, master of none, come up with nonsense and just, stitch things together in a way that sounds coherent. And it's just as a funny side story, I was having a chat with a bunch of lawyer friends of mine, and I think this was on the back of an application in the US that you could actually it'll create the whole appeal for you on ticket fines or whatnot. And my friend was like really old kind of rattled because it's threatening his profession. He says, this is all nonsense. It didn't pass the bar. And I'm like, it probably could pass the bar better than you. What the hell are you talking about? And it's like, oh no, but it's just putting information in a way that sounds reasonable. And I was like, but that's what lawyers do. So again, just jokes aside, but we kind of realized that, okay, we need to start putting these slight restraints on to make it more domain specific. So even while there's still maybe a risk of making a presumption, it won't go too lateral because it won't suddenly combine when you ask a question about, I don't know, what's the best fan to buy, and it suddenly throws in about bread making or whatnot. Again, I'm really going kind of here sideways, but you see my point. So I think that's where we are now. We're now realizing that, okay, great, amazing, awesome, really broad. Let's now slim it down to very, very specific applications. And then finally, which is a bit of an obvious, but then again, everything in hindsight is obvious, is validation. Just as you may tell me something, and I may come to you as being an expert and saying, oh, can you give me your view or perspective on this? And saying, I may take it full wholesale, or I may go, okay, I love it. It's great. It's helpful. I'm going to just validate. What would it go? Reagan tell Gorbachev, trust but verify. We definitely have to do it when we're dealing with a new competency, a new expert effectively is we need to have that validation. That's it.
So, I mean, there's so many different avenues, from what I understand, Bloomberg has built their own models, right? Or you can go to the open source, Llama 2, or open source, or you can go to Orca, or some of these other open source models that are out there. You can go to AWS or Microsoft, Google, Anthropic. It just got a $4 billion investment, from what I understand, from Amazon. And so, what do you do? Or maybe you can't say because it's like trade secret within your company, but are you using something like Microsoft and Copilot and Azure, and because they have so many tools out there, and you can do some additional fine-tuning, or are you building models from scratch and sort of ingesting data the way, and doing all of that? I mean, where are you on the spectrum of how do you employ and use all of this tech that's out there now? And everybody wants to try it, but you don't want it to hallucinate. You want it to be
absolutely.
Right. So what's your recommendation?
So, and perhaps this is a silly analogy, but if you think about transportation, you can use a tractor, you can use a Honda, you can use a Ferrari, hell, you can use a chopper, they're all transportation. But it's using the right mode of transportation for the right underlying objective. That is exactly our philosophy. And on a broader sense, I call it BBB, build, buy, borrow. The only reason we'll build something from scratch if we truly believe this needs to be done, and it doesn't exist. Otherwise, if the wheel's invented, it's like, just use the wheel. Right. But then again, there's various forms. For example, actually, we've experimented with Brad, because we're obviously leveraging on Copilot because it's just popping up as part of MS's suite. We're tapping on obviously via MS to open his eyes available APIs. We have leveraging on Llama because we have our own in private environment, because again, governance, we want to make sure that certain things no one else but us can see it or even have the risk. So it's about a fit for purpose. In the end of the day, they all will get you there. but some are maybe better than others. Now, of course, that opens up this difficulty, but then there's so many, which is the right one. But actually, if you go back, and there was this actually excellent diagram, though, actually, it might have been even Microsoft that did it, which listed all the different types of machine learning algorithms. There's a lot. Now, which one do you use? Now, technically speaking, you can use them all. And there's been papers about it that would compare the accuracy and performance. Well, we've got to such a stage that the difference is iotas. But what you're seeing is you can start ring fencing in terms of different segments of applications. For these types of application, this type of gradient descent, gradient-based methodologies are better. This one's classification-based methodologies are better. This one is, we're not there yet for LLMs, but I'm fairly confident you will find that, because just like with Bloomberg, I mean, what they've done is they've created which is kind of funny because you think about it, it's a a generative general learning model that's specific for finance. So if you're looking at the type of data that Bloomberg has trained on, why redo it? Just use that one. I mean, see, even to me, the Microsoft, the Google's, Amazon is like same out to them. It's like, you don't have that data of Bloomberg. Well, to me, it makes more sense. Come together and have an API that pulls that information from Bloomberg, and vice versa. It's still too early. We'll get there. That's how we're experimenting. We're looking in terms from a governance implications point of view, already pre-existing availability, like it's already pre-trained, it's already available. Just what's the saying? Bob's your uncle, or something that we really feel as fresh and no one's been successful and has tried it out. But again, to be quite honest, with the amount of money that's kind of being invested globally, that's becoming less and less and less. It's kind of really more of the integration of generative AI in ultimately the form of chat through applications of your phone, heck, TV, Slack, for example, as part of productivity. This is kind of what we're seeing. And again, it's about a conversational layer for knowledge management.
And then we have like Gemini coming out, and GPT-5 patents have been filed, and there's sort of these multimodal models integration, sort of iterations that have happened. DALL-E 3 being integrated now, this ability to call up agents or plugins, and all of this sort of evolving very, very quickly. And then this idea of AGI, something that's very, very capable, perhaps even more than humans, even though it's not human. Geoffrey Hinton has come out quite a bit earlier this year. What are your feelings about all of that?
This is what I mentioned. Bless you. This is when I mentioned that it kind of starts veering on the societal question and potential implication. Now, the challenge is, with a scientific hat on, you're always pursuing the unknown. Sometimes even at risk. I mean, heck, the first use of penicillin, etc., surgery. I mean, we've done crazy stuff. But that's where there needs to be a societal conversation. And what I always like to argue is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And in fact, what I was about to kind of chime in earlier about the generative AI is that I actually think we need to see a certain degree of convergence. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. We haven't spoken about the ESG aspect of things. These are very, very hungry beasts. So and again, it's a balance, because maybe it will progress innovation and capability, but on the other hand, do we need it right now? Is there a manner that could be more efficient in terms of energy? Is there a manner of actually combining forces, and rather 5 of us doing it, we only need 2, 3? So again, it's a genuine societal conversation that to me could only happen with, I call it frenemies, the different participants coming together around a table and just saying, beyond our own selfish objectives, and let's call a spade, and at the end of the day, just like OpenAI went from an organization for the, in a way, betterment to making money. And again, nothing wrong with that. But again, I just want to call a spade. there's ultimately a dollar sign in the end of the road, is saying, okay, we need to start balancing that with a broader impact, and which is the conversations we've been having now a lot more vehemently about energy. We need to have that same conversation on applications which we know are energy impactful or societal, or societally, I don't know what's the right term, they're impactful essentially. That's kind of how I look at it. So it's very difficult to weigh it one way or the other, especially, and having, you know, been in the US, Europe, Middle East, living now in Asia, different societies see things slightly, sometimes even very differently. It's not a matter of right or wrong. They just see it differently. So you may actually find that, let's say, certain progression, such as the AGI, will not be accepted. Again, hypothetically speaking, would not be accepted in Europe, but will be embraced in Asia. We have to have these conversations because it's early on. And by the way, if I go all the way back to fee principles, if you kind of read it now, it was kind of half disheartening when my managing director, my governor, read it, and they said, "David, this is kind of common sense. It's obvious." I was like, "Oh yeah, it took us 6 months to put it on paper." It's really key questions and criteria in terms of, actually, you can boil it down to one principle, or two actually: justification and transparency. Why are you doing it? Can you justify it for yourself? And are you transparent about it? And I'm an advocate believer that these two are the things that will help us to answer some of these underlying questions collectively.
But these questions are coming up so quickly. So we're an unusual time in the history of humanity, right? You have quantum computing, all these different sort of variations of quantum computing, and they're working on narrow problems right now, but there's this idea of broader problems. And what if P equals MP? You know, where MP is no longer an issue, because you have all of these sort of transformational capabilities, like the further iteration of the large foundation models, and being able to solve really what was considered problems that couldn't be solved, like protein folding used to be considered something that would take, you know, years. In fact, I think when ESM-Fold came out with their model, and they could apply it, and they did something like 600 million proteins predicted from acids. If you were to calculate what that would take using existing techniques that without using AI, and at that time the maximum number of proteins they could predict was maybe 2 million, and then using classical techniques maybe a couple 100,000, and then, you know, they come up with 600 million. I mean, that probably would have taken 100,000 years if and then it just popped up, right? And what else is going to pop up? And then you have quantum computing, and
that's going to completely change the game completely.
Yeah. So what is that? And that's going to be in the near term, or biotech, and David Sinclair and the work at Harvard, Altos Labs, and aging, and all of this convergence. And it's not 100 years from now or 50 years. It's in the next few years.
Well,
what does that mean
to us? Yeah. So three things. And you know, I take that point very close to heart in terms of the speed in which things are happening. And this has kind of always been my critique to regulatory bodies, in terms of the fact that you're just not fast enough. Again, it's just calling out the reality of the situation. But just going back, the 3 points that I was about to mention. The first one is level of materiality. While I know there's been the joint signed letter to, you know, stop AI, that's never going to happen. Humans will never stop innovating. Period. Having said that, is we need to look at the level of materiality, and we need to look at the aspect of, okay, if something goes wrong, what's going to be the impact to us? So, and that will basically tell you of, you know, this area, you know what? Go nuts, because even if something goes wrong, it's going to be an annoyance at best. Whereas, let's say if we're talking about the administration of medication, yeah, I would probably hold off having an AGI or even an AI in the actual administration of medicine, because if that goes wrong, you're looking at death. So that kind of gives us a degree of understanding of, call it in a very simplistic manner, human in the loop or over the loop. And some may complain, it's like, no, we can't. Again, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that's a very rudimentary mechanism to do that. And I would say that should be enforceable. That's number one. Number two is, well, other than the fact that regulators have to speed up, is just like with medicine. Once upon a time, you wanted to do an experiment, you want to try something out. You grabbed a whole bunch of people, jabbed them or subjected them to some whatnot and see what happened. Well, we now have to go through ethics boards. We need to get approvals. We need to get confirmations. We need to get consent. We're kind of coming to that maturity whereby AI may require, for experiments, ethics approval via an ethics committee. It's like, you want to do it? Sure. You need to get approval. And this is a universal requirement, just like with medicine. It's a universal requirement from an experimental point of view. Obviously, that is slightly a bit more long drawn because it became a bit more political, a bit more aspect. But again, just being very transparent. I mean, that's the answer. That's actually the beautiful thing sometimes. For the most complicated things, the answer is really simple. It's just the doing it is sometimes more complex. That's the balance, because there may be some things that may be, I don't want to use the word questionable, but impactful. But again, by having it reviewed, just as paper review, it becomes, okay, you are not permitted to do this. And if you do it, you're basically breaking a whole bunch of, not just laws, requirements. The other one, maybe you are permitted, but subject to certain requirements and controls. Or all's good, chug along kind of scenario. We don't have that right now. We need that. And it's then on a different dimension, and it's something that I've been advocating since 2017, is, at the lack of a better description, we need a data regulator. Why I say we need a data regulator, and this is not a privacy regulator. Privacy is looking in terms from a personal perspective, PII, am I being impacted, consent, etc. No, data. Because data is an industry. And just like we have transportation regulator, we have financial regulator, we have medical regulation, data is an industry. And as such, it needs to be regulated. And what's a regulation is trust but verify. I always get a bit weird when someone says to me, don't worry, I trust me. I trust you, but I want to verify. And also it's because you don't know everything. When I did, research, again, back early 2000s, questions that today are common sense, like when you submit papers to NeurIPS and, ICML and all that, there will be actually ethical questions in terms of how you've handled the data, discrimination, whatnot. So when I did that, it wasn't there. It didn't exist. Not because we were evil people. It just wasn't there. It hasn't come to our collective understanding as a scientific area. That's the element of maturity that I'm talking to. It is now. We have now come to that next level, realizing we need these controls, both scientifically as well as in industry-wise. My personal opinion.
But your personal opinion has weight because you're a leader of one of the biggest conglomerate groups in the region, and you're doing things that are global in many respects, and you're definitely having impact across so many different communities.
And Stephen, if I may, not to interject, is, at least for me, walking the talk. And what I mean by walking the talk, a lot of organizations will be like, yeah, we need regulations. And then you ask them, so what are you doing? And like, oh, we're waiting for the regulation. It's like, well, why? We are regulating ourselves. Now, again, full transparency, we might be missing stuff. We might not be doing it fully right, but something that's better than nothing. Every AI solution that we're looking at, we kind of review it internally. We have a council that will look in terms of not just from a technological point of view, but from a societal implication. Should we be doing this? We validate everything. We put controls. We look at it. Again, I'm fairly certain we're missing something, but I am a strong, just as I mentioned it, one has to sip their own champagne in terms of assuring that at least if something does go wrong, and let's be honest, at some point something will go wrong. It's just the reality of nature. Again, obviously, you want to mitigate the extent in which it does. At the very least, you can say, I have put every control in place to mitigate that. I have learned. We will improve on them so that these will never happen again. Versus, oops, we didn't realize.
Yeah, and I guess, being thoughtful and anticipating as much as you can and try to do risk mitigation as you can and still innovate as well. You want to continue the innovation.
Of course. And that's again, I'm sorry, just if I may. So one of the first questions I used to get asked a lot when I was with MAS is, oh, but David, isn't all this regulation and governance going to prevent innovation? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I simply cannot accept that statement. Yeah. Governance and regulation is a mechanism of guidance. By no means is regulation saying you're not allowed to do it, unless it's a genuine impact on people or breaking the law or something like that. On the contrary, it's saying innovate, but innovate with control, innovate without causing harm, innovate with an appreciation of what's surrounding you. So I always say that good governance, and I want that to sink for a little, good governance, good regulation a good regulation breeds innovation. It's absolutely critical. But in the end of the day, if we all just sit back and say, oh, we need regulation, we need policies, we need controls, but we're all waiting on the regulators or whomever to do it, I'm sorry, we're missing it. We need to do it. And let alone those who are saying, oh, we need regulation. And then when the regulator turns around and says, oh, so we're going to regulate, and then say like, oh, so we're not going to operate in your country. The value, the impact, the beneficial results of all this stuff, also, I believe, despite the risks of things like AGI, is astronomical. Like I said, it is a means, in my view, of bettering ourselves, as long as we put the human as part of that journey and in the center of that journey. But we must approach things with a prudence and the fiduciary responsibility, not only to ourselves, but to those around us, in doing it in the right way, whether explicitly required or not.
So, David, you definitely are the embodiment of, purposeful leadership, purposeful innovation, purposeful capital, purposeful business, purposeful impact, purposeful sustainability. I mean, across, I can see the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the 169 targets, and the 230 measures of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and then in the environmental, social governance, but sustainability aspects of all of it. So we're very thoughtful in everything that you do. I just find it so fascinating to be encompassed in you. And this is now your opportunity to give one sort of lasting word of advice. And that's the last question. What's your recommendations to the audience?
Well, my recommendation to the audience is really twofold. If a slightly longer sentence is, we can't just sit and watch. We have to actively participate. So that means embracing data, embracing AI. And as I said earlier, you don't need the law to do the right thing.
So that's great, more than food for thought, and it's something that people can live to as well. So, David, really thank you for coming in and sharing so many of your insights with our audience. It's just a marvelous conversation today. So thank you
very much. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.